You answer every call. You show up for everyone. You've never said no without guilt eating you alive. And now you're exhausted in a way sleep doesn't fix. You see someone's name on your phone and your stomach drops. Not because you hate them, because you know they need something. Again, here's what's happening. You've trained everyone in your life that you have no limits, that 2 a.m. is fine, that their emergency is always your priority, that you'll rearrange your entire life to accommodate theirs. And now you're trapped. Because the moment you try to pull back, the moment you don't respond immediately, the moment you say, "I can't," everyone loses their mind. You've changed. You're not the person I knew. I can't believe you're abandoning me. And you start wondering, am I the problem? Have I become selfish? No. But you are standing at a threshold Jung documented in patient after patient, a threshold where people either reclaim their life with wisdom or they weaponize their unavailability with rage. In 1928, Jung worked with a woman named Margaret. 35 years of being everyone's therapist, everyone's emergency contact, everyone's emotional support. Then her body gave out. She couldn't get out of bed, couldn't answer the phone, couldn't show up. Her family called her selfish. Her friends said she'd abandoned them. Her husband threatened to leave. She came to Jung thinking she was broken. Jung told her, "You're not broken. Your psyche is forcing the unavailability your ego refused to choose. This isn't pathology. This is protection." But then he warned her about something that would determine whether she became free or just became alone. He said, "There are 2 ways to stop being available. One creates space for genuine connection. The other creates isolation you'll call boundaries." And most people take the second path without realizing it. Margaret didn't believe him. She thought, "I would never weaponize my boundaries." 6 months later, she came back in tears. She'd stopped being available, but she'd done it with contempt. She'd ghosted everyone. She'd made people feel punished for ever needing her. She'd burned down relationships that could have been saved. She went from servant to tyrant, and she called it healing. Jung told her, "The integrated person is neither constantly available nor completely withdrawn. They're selectively available with conscious intention, and you're not there yet. This is the pattern. You discover your right to be unavailable. You enforce it, and then you cross from protection into punishment without even noticing. The question isn't whether you should stop being so available. You absolutely should. The question is, will you do it with wisdom? Or will you weaponize it with contempt? Because how you answer that question determines whether you become free or whether you just trade one prison for another. Let's start with what Jung understood about chronic availability that most people miss entirely. Availability isn't generosity, it's a psychological trade. When you make yourself constantly available, you're not just giving your time, you're giving something far more valuable. You're giving other people permission to regulate themselves through access to you. Jung called this psychic dependency, not in the therapeutic sense, in the relational sense. Your mother doesn't need to learn to manage her own anxiety because she can call you whenever she feels it rising. Your friend doesn't need to develop her own emotional resources because she can dump on you whenever she's overwhelmed. Your colleague doesn't need to figure out time management because you'll always cover his shortfall. Your availability has become the scaffolding holding up other people's unfinished development. And here's what makes this so insidious. You feel needed, important, valuable, like you matter because people need you. Jung called this the helper's shadow, the unconscious gratification you get from being indispensable. You're not just helping people out of compassion. You're helping because being needed confirms your worth. Because being the one everyone calls proves you matter. Because having people depend on you creates a sense of importance you don't feel in other areas of your life. This is the part no one wants to look at, the part where your availability isn't entirely selfless. You're getting something from it, a sense of purpose, a feeling of significance, proof that you're good, valuable, necessary. And as long as that psychological payoff exists, you'll keep being available even when it's destroying you. Because stopping means facing the question, who am I if I'm not the person everyone needs? Margaret had to face this question in therapy with Jung. When he suggested she stop being so available, her first response wasn't relief, it was panic. But if I'm not there for them, who am I? Jung asked. Who are you when you're there for them? Are you yourself? Or are you performing the role of helper because that's the only identity you trust people to value? Margaret broke down. Because the truth was, she didn't know who she was outside of being needed. She'd built her entire identity around being available, being indispensable, being the one who never said no. Taking that away felt like dying. This is what Jung called identification with the persona. When you become so merged with the role you play that you lose contact with who you actually are beneath it. And your availability is the mechanism that maintains this false identity. As long as people keep needing you, you never have to face the terrifying question of who you are when you're not being useful. But here's what Jung discovered. Your psyche knows. Your self knows that you're living a lie, that you're performing availability rather than offering genuine connection, that you're using other people's needs to avoid your own emptiness, and eventually your psyche will force the confrontation you're avoiding. For some people, that looks like Margaret's complete collapse, where the body simply refuses to maintain the availability anymore. For others, it's a slow growing resentment that poisons every interaction until you can't stand the people you once loved serving. For others still, it's a sudden breaking point where one small request becomes the thing that makes you explode with years of accumulated rage. However it happens, the message is the same. Stop being available to everyone else and start being available to yourself. But here's where most people go wrong. They hear that message and they immediately swing to the opposite extreme. They go from completely available to completely withdrawn, from accommodating everything to accommodating nothing, from saying yes to everything to saying no to everything. They don't create boundaries, they build walls, and they call it healing, when really it's just another form of avoidance. They were avoiding themselves by being constantly available. Now they're avoiding relationship by being constantly unavailable. Neither position is integrated, neither position allows for genuine connection. Both are reactions rather than responses. Jung was clear. The goal isn't to go from one extreme to another. The goal is to find the center, where you're available when it serves relationship and unavailable when it serves your integrity. That requires something most people don't have. The ability to tolerate other people's disappointment without either collapsing into guilt or hardening into contempt. When you say no to someone's request, can you hold steady while they're upset? Can you let them be disappointed without either A, immediately changing your no to a yes to alleviate their discomfort, or B, judging them as weak, needy, or manipulative for being disappointed? If you can't hold that middle ground, if disappointment from others either controls you or triggers your contempt, you're not ready for strategic unavailability yet. You'll either stay trapped in chronic availability or you'll swing into weaponized withdrawal. So what actually happens when you stop being so available? Jung documented this transformation in patient after patient, and the changes follow a predictable pattern that most people aren't prepared for. Change number 1. People reveal who they actually are. When you're constantly available, everyone looks like a genuine connection. When you become unavailable, you discover who was actually in relationship with you versus who was in relationship with your function. The people who were genuinely connected. They're disappointed by your boundaries, but they adjust. They express their feelings, and then they respect your limits. They might not like it, but they don't punish you for it. The people who are using you, they rage, they guilt, they manipulate, they threaten to leave, they tell everyone you've changed for the worse. They make you the villain in their story because you stopped playing the supporting role in their life. Margaret discovered this brutally. When she stopped being available, her mother escalated. Daily calls became multiple calls. When Margaret didn't answer, her mother would call her siblings crying about being abandoned. When Margaret set a boundary about 1 call per week, her mother threatened to cut her out of the will. Her mother never cared about Margaret. She cared about having access to Margaret's regulating presence. And when that access was threatened, the mask came off. This is the first major change. Your unavailability becomes a sorting mechanism. It reveals who loves you versus who loves what you provide. And that revelation is often devastating, because you realize how many of your relationships were actually transactions, how many people only showed up when they needed something, how few people were genuinely interested in reciprocal connection. Change number 2, your energy returns. This one surprises people. They expect to feel guilty when they become less available, and they do at first. But underneath the guilt, there's something else: energy, vitality, interest in your own life again. You didn't realize how much energy was constantly leaking through your availability. Every text demanding immediate response, every call pulling you out of your own experience, every favor requiring you to rearrange your life. Death by 1,000 small interruptions, 1,000 small demands, 1,000 small expectations that you'd always be there. When you close those leaks, when you stop responding immediately, stop accommodating every request, stop making yourself endlessly accessible, suddenly you have energy for your own life again. You have attention for your own thoughts, capacity for your own projects, interest in your own development. Jung called this the return of libido, life energy that was flowing outward in service to everyone else, finally flowing back toward your own becoming. Margaret noticed this 3 months into her unavailability practice. She started painting again, something she hadn't done in 20 years. Not because she suddenly had more hours in the day, but because she suddenly had energy she wasn't spending on everyone else's needs. Change number 3, relationships. Rebalance or dissolve. The relationships that survive your unavailability, they get better, deeper, more genuine. Because you're no longer performing the role of helper. You're no longer available because you need to be needed. You're available because you actually want to connect. And that shift from obligated availability to chosen availability changes the entire dynamic. The people who were already capable of reciprocity appreciate this version of you more. They like knowing they're not just another demand on your time. They value the connection because they know it's voluntary, not compulsive. But here's the hard part. Most of your relationships won't survive your unavailability, not because those people are bad, not because you did something wrong, but because those relationships were built on a foundation of your overfunction and their underfunction. When you stop overfunctioning, the relationship has no foundation. Jung was blunt with Margaret about this. Most of your relationships will end, not because they hate you now, but because they never actually knew you. They knew the role you played. When you stop playing that role, they're relating to a stranger. And most people don't have interest in meeting the stranger underneath the helper. This is the loss people don't expect. They think setting boundaries means relationships will adjust. Sometimes they do, but often the relationship was never about you. It was about your function. And when you stop providing that function, there's nothing left. Change number 4, you discover your actual capacity. When you're chronically available, you have no idea what your actual capacity is, because you're always operating beyond it. You've trained yourself to say yes even when you're empty, to show up even when you're depleted, to give even when you have nothing left. That's not capacity. That's self-destruction masked as compassion. When you become selectively available, you discover what you can actually sustain. Not what you can force through guilt and willpower, but what you can genuinely maintain with integrity. And here's what shocks most people. Your actual capacity is much smaller than you thought. You can't be everyone's therapist. You can't solve everyone's problems. You can't be the rock for multiple people simultaneously. You can't maintain deep connection with 30 people. Your actual capacity might be 3 people, maybe 5, maybe even just 1 or 2 people you can genuinely show up for without depleting yourself. And everyone else? They get your availability when you have surplus, not your constant accessibility. Margaret discovered she could genuinely maintain 3 relationships: her husband, her sister, and 1 close friend. Everyone else in her life? She could be occasionally available, but not constantly accessible. At first, this felt selfish, like she was abandoning people. Jung reframed it. You're not abandoning anyone. You're finally being honest about what you can actually provide. The lie was pretending you could be available to everyone. The truth is offering genuine availability to the few you actually have capacity for. Now we need to talk about the trap that destroys most people who reach this point. There are 2 ways to withdraw your availability, and the difference between them determines whether you become free or whether you just become cruel. The integrated approach to unavailability looks like this. You stop responding immediately, but you're warm when you do respond. There's a time buffer. You're not at everyone's beck and call, but when you engage, you're genuinely present. You say no without guilt, but also without contempt. I'm not available for that is delivered neutrally, not with judgment about them for asking. You're less accessible, but the access you do provide is higher quality. People get less of your time, but more of your actual presence. You let people experience disappointment, but you don't punish them for being disappointed. They're allowed to have feelings about your boundaries. You're allowed to maintain the boundaries anyway. Both things are true simultaneously. You withdraw from relationships that were extractive, but you communicate why rather than just disappearing. This dynamic doesn't work for me anymore is honest, not vindictive. This is availability guided by conscious intention rather than compulsive obligation. Jung worked with Margaret for months to help her understand this distinction. She kept confusing setting boundaries with cutting people off. He told her, a boundary is a threshold you maintain. A wall is punishment disguised as protection. If you feel powerful when people can't reach you, that's not a boundary. That's revenge. But most people who stop being available take this path instead, and they don't realize they're doing it until they've destroyed every relationship in their life. The inflated approach to unavailability looks like this. You don't just become less available, you become completely inaccessible. You ghost people without explanation. You go from responding to everything to responding to nothing. When you do engage, you're cold. There's a pervasive sense of contempt. I told you I'm not available is delivered with judgment, superiority, disdain. You're not just protecting your energy. You're punishing people for ever needing you in the first place. Every request is treated as an intrusion. Every expression of need is judged as weakness. You don't just say no. You make people feel bad for asking. I can't believe you'd even ask me that after everything isn't a boundary. It's cruelty. You withdraw from relationships not because they're extractive, but because all relationship requires some accommodation, and you've decided you're done accommodating anyone ever again. You've gone from having no boundaries to having walls so high no one can reach you, and you call it self-care when really, it's isolation disguised as healing. Margaret did this for 6 months before she realized what was happening. She'd stopped answering calls, stopped responding to texts, stopped showing up for anyone. Her husband asked her to talk about something important. I'm not available for heavy conversations right now. Her sister needed support during a genuine crisis. I've given enough. Figure it out yourself. Her friend made a small request. Margaret responded with a lecture about boundaries and a list of all the times the friend had used her over the years. She wasn't protecting herself. She was punishing everyone for the years she'd spent overgiving. And she didn't even realize it until Jung confronted her directly. You're not setting boundaries. You're using unavailability as a weapon. Every interaction has become an opportunity to prove you're no longer the doormat. But in trying to prove you're not a doormat, you've become someone who steps on everyone else. That's when Margaret finally saw it. The way she'd been delivering her unavailability with contempt. The way she'd been making people feel small for ever needing anything. The way she'd been using boundaries to justify coldness, detachment, emotional abandonment. She'd become unavailable not to protect her peace, but to assert her power. And that power required other people to feel powerless. This is inflation, and it's the most common outcome when people discover they have the right to be unavailable. Jung's diagnostic. Which path are you on? Here's how you know which path you're taking. First question. When people can't reach you, do you feel peace or power? If you're integrating, you feel peaceful when you're unavailable, relieved, like you can finally breathe. If you're inflating, you feel powerful when people can't reach you, vindicated, like you're finally in control and they're not. Second question. Can you be unavailable without contempt? If you're integrating, you can say, "I'm not available," without judging the person for needing something. If you're inflating, every "I'm not available" comes with an unspoken, "How dare you even ask?" Third question. Are your relationships deepening or dissolving? If you're integrating, the healthy relationships are getting deeper because they're based on genuine connection rather than obligation. If you're inflating, all relationships are dissolving because no one can meet your impossible standard of never needing anything. Fourth question. Do you explain or do you disappear? If you're integrating, you communicate your boundaries. "I need more space in this relationship," gives people information. If you're inflating, you just disappear. Ghosting feels easier than having a conversation about changing dynamics. Fifth question. Can you tolerate their disappointment? If you're integrating, yes. They're allowed to be disappointed. You hold your boundary without either collapsing or attacking. If you're inflating, no. Either their disappointment makes you feel so guilty you change your boundary, or it makes you angry and you attack them for being disappointed. If you're honest with yourself, you know which path you're on. So how do you withdraw your availability with wisdom instead of contempt? Jung developed a framework for this with Margaret, and it requires something most people resist: intention and consciousness instead of reaction. Step 1. Audit your availability. Before you change anything, get honest about where your availability is actually going. Make a list of everyone who has regular access to you: family, friends, colleagues, acquaintances. For each person, ask, is this relationship reciprocal? Do they show up for me the way I show up for them? Am I available because I want to be, or because I feel obligated? Does this availability serve the relationship, or maintain dysfunction? Am I being genuinely helpful, or enabling them to avoid their own growth? Margaret did this exercise and was shocked. Out of 20 people who had regular access to her, only 3 relationships were actually reciprocal. The rest were one-directional extraction. She wasn't helping those 17 people. She was preventing them from developing their own resources by being endlessly available as their solution. Step 2. Communicate before you withdraw. This is the step most people skip. They just start being unavailable without explanation and then wonder why everyone's upset. The integrated approach: give people information. I've realized I've been overextended. I'm going to be less available going forward. That doesn't mean I don't care about you. It means I need to take better care of myself. You don't owe anyone a detailed justification, but basic communication prevents relationships that could survive from being destroyed by confusion. Margaret did this with her mother. "Mom, I love you, and I'm no longer available for daily calls. I need more space. We can talk once a week." Her mother wasn't happy. But because Margaret communicated rather than just disappearing, they eventually found a new dynamic that worked. Step 3. Create time buffers. Stop responding immediately to everything. Create space between someone's request and your response. Text comes in, you don't respond for hours, or even a day. Call comes through, you let it go to voicemail and call back when you have actual capacity. This isn't about being rude. It's about training people and yourself that you're not constantly accessible. The people who are genuinely in relationship with you will adjust. The people who were using your immediate availability will struggle, and that struggle reveals the nature of the relationship. Step 4. Let no be a complete sentence. You don't need to explain your unavailability. You don't need to justify your boundaries. You don't need to make people understand. I'm not available for that. That's it. Complete sentence, no explanation required. The guilt you feel when you don't explain, that's your helper's shadow trying to maintain the old dynamic where you had to justify your limits. Let the guilt exist. Maintain the boundary anyway. Step 5. Tolerate their discomfort without fixing it. This is the hardest part. When people are disappointed, upset, or angry about your unavailability, your first instinct will be to fix it, to apologize, to accommodate after all. Don't. Let them have their feelings. Let them be disappointed. Let them be upset. You're not responsible for making everyone feel comfortable with your boundaries. You're responsible for maintaining your boundaries even when others are uncomfortable. Jung told Margaret, every time you change your boundary to alleviate someone else's discomfort, you're teaching them that your boundaries aren't real, that if they just push hard enough, you'll cave. Step 6. Check your motivation. This is Jung's critical checkpoint. Before you enforce unavailability, ask yourself, am I protecting myself or am I punishing them? If you feel peaceful, you're protecting. If you feel powerful over them, you're punishing. If you can maintain the boundary without contempt, it's integration. If you need them to feel bad about it, it's inflation. Margaret had to check this constantly. Every time she enforced a boundary, Jung would ask, did you feel peace or power? For months, the honest answer was power. She was enjoying making people feel the consequences of their entitlement to her. That's when Jung knew she was still inflated. She was using unavailability as revenge, not protection. It took a full year before Margaret could say no without contempt, before she could be unavailable without feeling superior about it, before she could protect herself without punishing others. That's when Jung knew she'd integrated. Step 7. Remain available to yourself. Here's the paradox. You need to stop being available to everyone else so you can finally be available to yourself. The time you're no longer spending on other people's needs, use it for your own becoming, your own interests, your own development. If you stop being available to others but remain unavailable to yourself, if you're just withdrawn and isolated without any engagement with your own life, you've missed the point entirely. The goal isn't unavailability as an end. The goal is reclaiming your energy so you can invest it in your own individuation. Margaret realized 6 months in, she'd stopped being available to everyone else, but she still wasn't available to herself. She was just empty, withdrawn, going through motions. Jung asked her, what do you actually want to do with this energy you've reclaimed? She didn't know. She'd spent so long being needed that she had no idea who she was without that role. That's when the real work began, not just withdrawing availability from others, but cultivating availability to herself, her own interests, her own voice, her own becoming. When you stop being so available, people will say predictable things, and Jung had specific interpretations for each one. When they say, you've changed, here's what Jung understood they're really saying. You're no longer performing the role I needed you to play. I don't know how to relate to the actual you, so I'm going to imply that changing is bad. If you're integrated, you might respond, I have changed. I'm no longer available in ways that deplete me. If you're inflated, you might respond, you're right. I'm done being your doormat. Notice the contempt in that second response. When they say, you're not the person I knew, Jung's interpretation, I didn't actually know you. I knew the role you played. Now that you've stopped playing it, I'm confused and uncomfortable. The integrated response, you're right. The person you knew was sacrificing herself to maintain these dynamics. I'm not willing to do that anymore. The inflated response, good. The person you knew was weak. Notice the self-judgment projected outward. When they say, "You used to be so giving," what they're really saying, "You used to give me access to your resources without boundaries. Now I actually have to respect your limits and I don't like it." The integrated response, "I'm still giving. I'm just giving from fullness instead of depletion, and I'm giving to relationships that are reciprocal." The inflated response, "I gave enough. Now it's my turn." Notice the scorekeeping mentality. When they say, "I can't believe you're abandoning me," Jung's translation, "I built my life around your constant availability. When you remove that, I have to face my own lack of internal resources. That's uncomfortable. So I'm making it about you abandoning me rather than about me never developing self-sufficiency." The integrated response, "I'm not abandoning you. I'm no longer available in the way I was before. Those are different things." The inflated response, "Maybe if you'd appreciated me more, I'd still be around." Notice the punishment in that. When they say, "You're being selfish," what this actually means, "I benefited from your selflessness. When you start prioritizing yourself, I lose access to what I was extracting. Rather than acknowledge I was taking advantage, I'll call you selfish for stopping." The integrated response, "I'm prioritizing my well-being. If that looks selfish to you, that reveals how much you were benefiting from my self-neglect." The inflated response, "Yeah, I am selfish now. Deal with it." Notice the defiance. You're still letting them control your emotional state. When they say, "I don't even recognize you anymore," Jung understood this as, "You're no longer predictable. I can't manipulate you the way I used to. The version of you I recognized was the version I could control." The integrated response, "The version you recognized was performing a role. This is who I actually am." The inflated response, "Good. I don't want to be recognized by someone like you." Notice the contempt. See the pattern? Every integrated response maintains the boundary without attacking the person. Every inflated response uses the boundary as an opportunity to wound, judge, or prove superiority. Jung told Margaret, "When people accuse you of changing, they're right. You have changed. The question is, are you changing toward integration or toward another form of dysfunction? If your responses are full of contempt, you're just exchanging one dysfunction for another." Jung developed one final diagnostic to help Margaret determine if she was truly integrated or still operating from inflation. He asked her, "Can you be unavailable to someone without needing them to understand why?" Margaret realized, no, she couldn't. Every time she enforced a boundary, she needed the person to acknowledge she was justified, to admit they'd taken advantage, to validate that she had the right to say no. If they didn't give her that validation, she'd either A. collapse and accommodate them after all, or B. attack them with all the evidence of how they'd used her. She couldn't just be unavailable and be at peace with it, whether they understood or not. That's how Jung knew she was still in the shadow, because true integration doesn't need external validation. It doesn't require other people's understanding. It doesn't demand that everyone see your perspective. Integrated unavailability looks like, "I'm not available for this. You don't have to understand. You don't have to like it. I'm at peace with my choice regardless of your response." Inflated unavailability looks like, "I'm not available for this, and here's why. And you need to acknowledge that I'm right, and you've been taking advantage of me, and I need you to feel bad about it." One is a boundary, the other is a weapon. Jung spent another 6 months working with Margaret on this exact point, teaching her to hold her unavailability without needing vindication, without needing people to admit fault, without needing external validation that she was justified. The day Margaret said, "I'm not available," to her mother, and felt peaceful when her mother didn't understand, that's the day Jung knew she'd finally integrated. She didn't need her mother to see her perspective, didn't need her mother to validate the boundary, didn't need her mother to feel bad. She was just unavailable, and at peace with that reality whether her mother accepted it or not. That's integration. If you're still fighting with people about your boundaries, if you're still trying to make them understand, still needing them to validate your limits, still requiring them to acknowledge how they've wronged you, you're not integrated yet. You're still letting their response control your emotional state. You're still giving them power over your peace. The integrated person doesn't need anyone's permission or understanding to be unavailable. They just are, and they're at peace regardless of how others respond. So here's where we are. You've been chronically available to everyone, for everything, and it's destroying you. You're standing at the threshold where you get to choose. Will you reclaim your availability with wisdom, or will you weaponize it with contempt? Because make no mistake, when you stop being so available, everything changes. People reveal who they actually are. Users expose themselves. Genuine connections deepen. Most relationships dissolve because they were built on your overfunction. Your energy returns. Your capacity becomes clear. Your life becomes your own again. But, and this is critical, only if you do it with integration instead of inflation. If you withdraw your availability with contempt, if you use it to punish everyone who ever needed you, if you make people feel small for ever asking anything of you, then yes, everything changes. But it changes into isolation, not freedom. You become unavailable not just to those who are using you, but to everyone. You build walls so high that genuine connection becomes impossible. You use boundaries to justify coldness and call it healing. That's not integration. That's just another form of dysfunction. The integrated approach is different. It's harder. It requires being unavailable without contempt, setting boundaries without punishment, letting people be disappointed without either fixing it or attacking them, protecting yourself without needing vindication, saying no without needing them to understand why. This is availability guided by conscious intention rather than compulsive obligation or reactive withdrawal. And yes, people will be upset. Yes, they'll say you've changed. Yes, you'll lose relationships, but you won't lose yourself in the process. Margaret spent 2 years learning this distinction. 2 years of catching herself when she was using boundaries as weapons. 2 years of practicing being unavailable without contempt. When Jung finally released her from therapy, he told her, "You're neither the servant you were, nor the tyrant you became. You're finally just Margaret. Available when you choose to be, unavailable when you need to be, and at peace with both." That's the transformation, not from available to unavailable, but from unconscious availability to conscious choice. You didn't become cruel when you stopped being available. You became honest. You didn't become selfish. You became self-preserving. You didn't become cold. You became selective. And the people who say you've changed, they're right. You have. The question is, are you changing toward integration or toward another form of imbalance? Check your responses. Feel your energy when you enforce boundaries. Notice whether you feel peace or power. If you feel peace, if you can be unavailable without contempt, if you can let people be disappointed without either collapsing or attacking, you're integrating. If you feel power, if there's vindication when people can't reach you, if you need them to feel bad about your boundaries, you're inflating. Everything changes when you stop being so available. Make sure it changes toward freedom, not just toward a different kind of prison. Comment below, are you practicing protective unavailability, integration, or punitive unavailability, inflation? Be honest. That honesty is the only thing that will keep you on the path toward actual freedom. Subscribe for more of Jung's teachings about the shadow work nobody wants to do, the work of recognizing when your healing becomes its own form of wounding. You're not here to be endlessly available. You're here to be selectively present with conscious intention. Everything changes when you understand the difference.